Hello, my dear listeners. Please write in the comments which city or country you are listening to us from. And don't forget to subscribe and like. Enjoy the listening. The crunch of metal and the sound of impact against concrete. The moment Ethan Cole's bicycle wheels lifted off the ground, he realized that his life would never be the same again. A sharp jerk, a flight through the air, and then a deafening crash against the cold asphalt. The bicycle crumpled under the weight of the police car, its metal skeleton emitting a death rattle. Ethan felt the air being knocked out of his lungs, and a grenade exploded in his head. The smell of burnt rubber and gasoline hit his nostrils, mingling with the taste of blood in his mouth. He heard fragments of phrases, the laughter of officers, before the world faded away, plunging into black, icy darkness. He didn't know why they did it. He had just sold the only thing he had to save his brother. Now he had nothing left but pain and the question, why? Ethan woke up on the cold asphalt, his head buzzing as if a grenade had exploded inside. His body ached from the impact, every muscle protesting. He felt the cold, rough asphalt digging into his skin. Steel handcuffs were clasped around his wrists, digging into his flesh, leaving red marks. Two officers leaned over him. One, a sturdy man with a hard gaze and sparse hair, smelling of cigarettes and cheap cologne, introduced himself as Officer Stone. His eyes were as cold as ice. The other, a fragile woman with wary, almost frightened eyes, Officer Davis, seemed less confident, her gaze darting around. They began to search his backpack. Stone pulled out a hefty bundle of cash. The bills were tightly bound with rubber bands, so many that they barely fit in his hand. The rustle of the bills seemed to mock his misfortune, his shattered life. "What's this, buddy?" Stone said, his voice full of contempt, as if he were speaking to dirt beneath his feet. "Drug money, right?" Ethan tried to explain that it wasn't true. He had sold his share in his beloved restaurant, The Hearth, a place he had built over the years, pouring his soul into it, every brick, every idea. It was his brainchild, his pride, his only real achievement after returning from the army. He had seen families gather in his restaurant, heard children laughing, felt the smell of fresh pastries and coffee. $10,000 from that amount was meant for his younger brother Daniel's bail, and with the rest, he planned to buy a used pickup truck to start a new life, far away from Silverwood. Daniel, his only brother, meant everything to Ethan. He was 5 years younger, and from childhood, Ethan had felt responsible for him. Daniel, foolishly, had once testified against a local crime lord, and now his life hung by a thread in state prison. Ethan felt cold sweat trickling down his back as he thought about what could happen to Daniel there. "We've decided that the money was obtained from drug sales," Stone said coldly, ignoring all of Ethan's explanations as if he were talking to a deaf wall. "You will receive a court summons. If you don't show up, we'll arrest you. If you ignore it, the money stays with us." The handcuffs were taken off Ethan. Metal clinked, and he felt blood rush back to his wrists. "Have a good day," Davis said, avoiding his gaze, her voice barely audible, almost a whisper, full of awkwardness. Ethan felt anger boiling in his chest, burning him from the inside, but he was powerless. He was alone against a system that seemed set against him. A few days later, Ethan went to court. In his hands, he held only a seizure notice, not his money. The paper seemed like a mockery. He was informed that Daniel would be transferred to a state prison. Ethan's heart tightened into a painful lump. He knew this was a death sentence. Daniel would be killed. He imagined the cold walls of the prison, shadows hiding dangers, and felt panic rising in his throat. Ethan turned to Sarah Jenkins, a young but already well-known lawyer, whose name he found in an old crumpled newspaper. She was known for her principles and for not being afraid to take on difficult cases. Sarah, with tired but perceptive eyes, explained that the seizure was legal if there was sufficient suspicion of drug trafficking. And most outrageously, the police chief could keep the entire amount as a donation. Her voice sounded weary, but there was a hint of indignation that spoke of her inner struggle. "You can go to court, Ethan," Sarah said, her voice full of sympathy but also hopelessness. "But you'll spend twice as much on a lawyer as you lost. It's a vicious cycle that's almost impossible to escape." Ethan told her about Daniel, about his testimony, about the deadly danger he faced. Sarah listened attentively, her face growing more serious, the wrinkle between her brows deepening. "I need $10,000 to get him out of there," Ethan said, his voice trembling with despair, barely holding back tears. "I have to find it as soon as possible." He called his former boss, an old friend, who promised to send the money via bank transfer. Ethan waited at the bank, his heart pounding like a drum. But when he approached the window, the transfer was not there. His boss called him, his voice full of apologies, but fear was evident in it. "Ethan, I'm sorry, but after your statement to the police, I'm having problems. They're pressuring me. I can't send the money. I'm really sorry." Ethan felt the ground slip from under his feet. He was in a strange city, without money, without acquaintances, without hope. He had to spend the night in the woods, under the cold, starry sky of Silverwood, listening to the whisper of the wind, which seemed to be the voice of his despair. Every twig that cracked underfoot felt like the steps of pursuers. He felt utterly alone, abandoned to fate. The cold seeped into his bones and the pain from his bruises kept him awake. He heard the hooting of an owl, the cracking of branches under the paws of invisible beasts. The smell of damp earth and pine filled his lungs. Thoughts raced in his head: Daniel, the hearth, money, injustice. He clenched his fist, feeling despair trying to engulf him. But somewhere deep inside, a cold, steely resolve was growing. He could not give up. In the morning, exhausted and angry, with swollen eyes from lack of sleep, he arrived at the police station. He sat down at a table and began to write a statement, describing the features of Stone and Davis, trying to remember every detail of their faces, their voices. Suddenly, Officer Davis left her post, her gaze slid over Ethan, and she returned with Stone. Stone slammed his driver's license on the table in front of Ethan. The plastic hit the wood with a dull thud. "Get out of here, or you'll be arrested," Stone growled, his eyes burning with malice. "Bail, prosecutors. You don't belong here." At that moment, the police chief, Randall Thorne, entered the room. Tall, with an authoritative demeanor and cold, piercing eyes, he radiated an aura of absolute power. His presence filled the room. "The arrest was legal and Mr. Cole was treated with respect," Thorne stated, his voice calm, but with a steel firmness that allowed no objections. "But now Mr. Cole faces criminal charges if he continues to pursue my officers. So kindly turn off the recorder and leave my station." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't even noticed that he was holding a recorder, which he had turned on out of habit. He asked for at least $10,000 to cover bail, and he was willing to forget about the remaining $26,000. Thorne smiled. It was a predatory smile, full of superiority. "Thank you." "Now get out," Thorne said, his voice dripping with contempt. Ethan realized he had been deceived once again. He was just a pawn in their game. He had to spend another night in the woods. The cold seeped into his bones. In the morning, he learned that the bus with the prisoners, including Daniel, had already left. Ethan rushed to the precinct, but it was too late. He knew that Daniel was in deadly danger. Every hour of delay could cost him his life. Without hesitation, Ethan rode through the woods to cut across. He pedaled his old bicycle with all his might, branches whipping against his face, leaving scratches. His lungs burned, muscles cramped, but he didn't stop. He managed to catch up with the bus on the move. He shouted to Daniel to signal for an arrest, so everyone would know he wasn't just a fugitive, but a victim. Ethan knew that Daniel was already known in prison as the one who testified against a crime lord. His life was hanging by a thread. Meanwhile, the police stormed into the Hearth, Ethan's restaurant. The sounds of breaking dishes and the screams of the staff reached him over the phone. Under the pretext that drugs were being sold there, they confiscated the boss's safe with the earnings. This was the final nail in the coffin of his dreams, his future. Ethan felt his heart tighten with pain and hopelessness. Later, as they drove by, Ethan saw his restaurant. The windows were shattered, the doors boarded up like a tombstone for his dream. In the broken display, a faded photograph still showed him, young and full of hope, standing at the stove, smiling. That smile now seemed like mockery. The sight of his shattered dream only fueled the fire of his rage. Ethan turned to Sarah again. She was his last hope, his only ally. But even she was pressured. Her superiors threatened her with dismissal if she continued to work on Ethan's case. Sarah, do you understand that you are jeopardizing not only your career, but the reputation of the entire firm? Her boss told her, his voice cold. These people are very influential. Just back off. However, Sarah did not give up. Her eyes, usually filled with fatigue, now burned with determination. She began to act secretly, risking everything. She discovered that something was off. Daniel was assigned an excessively high bail and a 90-day postponement. And there were many cases where detainees sat for exactly 90 days, dozens, if not hundreds. Sarah realized that this was not a coincidence. It was a system. She spent nights in her small, paper-strewn apartment, studying old cases, feeling as if she were being watched. Every rustle behind her, every unfamiliar car, made her heart race. The girl was taking a huge risk, but the sense of injustice wouldn't let her rest. The police learned that Ethan had served in the Marine Corps. They thought he had no combat experience, that he was just a paper soldier. Thorne was pleased that he had fooled Ethan. How dare he bargain and set conditions in my precinct? Thorne sneered, rubbing his hands together. Ethan returned to the precinct. He walked in, his gaze cold and focused. I checked. What was he doing? Fixing cars? No, I was in the infantry, but they found a use for me domestically, Ethan said, his voice calm, but there was a hidden threat, a steely resolve. He realized he had been cornered, and now he would have to act differently. He could no longer play by their rules. He was a Marine, and he would fight. At that moment, Officer Davis, who had been watching Ethan all this time, felt something change within her. She saw his desperation, his determination, and it touched something in her. She was fed up with this corruption, these dirty games that ruin the lives of ordinary people. She found out that Ethan was a close combat instructor. He was a master. Thorne, sensing danger, easily drew his gun from its holster. But Ethan, with lightning speed that no one expected, grabbed it and fired. The slide clicked. Shells fell to the floor. He pretended to take Thorne hostage, pressing the gun to his temple, then disarmed Stone. A jiu-jitsu master, Ethan took down the other officers who tried to stop him, their screams echoing through the precinct's corridors. He entered the police station with them like a ghost, bringing retribution. He ripped out the phone line, cutting off the station's connection to the outside world. The crackling of wires was the only sound in the ensuing silence. He ordered the hostages to sit on the floor. In the adjacent office, Davis was hiding. She watched the unfolding events, her eyes filled with fear and perhaps admiration. Ethan looked at her. She understood him without words. With trembling hands, Davis handed him her gun and handcuffed her colleagues. She was fed up with the corruption, with these dirty games. She saw Ethan, a man wrongfully accused, fighting for what he believed in. It made her remember why she had joined the police in the first place. After that, Ethan sent her to the evidence locker. Count to 10, Ethan said, his voice steady. A deal is a deal. My money. A bunch of armed thugs, summoned by Thorne, had already gathered around the building. Ethan ordered Davis to pretend she had arrested him. Davis got into the car, with Ethan beside her. She showed an approaching officer that everything was fine, feigning calmness. Ethan handed Davis his gun, and then he climbed onto his bike and rode to the courthouse. His heart raced, but he felt a surge of adrenaline. Finally, he was able to post bail for Daniel. After that, Ethan shared his plans to surrender and go to prison with his brother. He wanted to be close to him, to protect him, He felt it was his duty, but their conversation was interrupted by a police squad bursting into the building. Shouts, the pounding of feet, the clanking of weapons. Ethan was ordered to kneel and was immediately shot with a taser. The jolt coursed through his body, his muscles seized, and he fell to the floor. When he regained consciousness, two medics were roughly examining him. Then he was shoved into a police car. Thorne got in beside him. "I wouldn't have messed with you, Cole, if I had known who you were," Thorne said, his voice filled with grudging respect, but also a hidden threat. "We don't get enough funding, so we have to come up with something for ourselves." Ethan remembered seeing a pile of cash and a serious arsenal of weapons in their warehouse. It was much more than just coming up with something. It was an entire criminal scheme. The car stopped near the hospital. Thorne threw the remaining $26,000 onto the ground. The bills scattered in the wind. He removed the handcuffs from Ethan. "Daniel was attacked in jail," Thorne said, his voice devoid of any sympathy, as if he were talking about the weather. "He was cut up pretty badly. Take the money and get out, or you'll sit in prison for 30 years. He won't get a second chance. All he had to do was nothing." Ethan felt a cold wave of horror wash over him. He couldn't believe his ears. "What did they tell me? That Daniel died in the hospital, never regaining consciousness?" Ethan said, his voice barely audible, like the whisper of the wind. At that moment, the world around him collapsed. Daniel, his younger brother, he was dead. Ethan felt his heart shatter into pieces, as if pierced by 1,000 knives. Every memory of Daniel, of his laughter, of the dreams they had built, now turned into sharp pain. He saw his face, heard his voice, and this loss was unbearable. But it was not just pain, it was fuel for revenge. Grief and rage mixed within him, forming a burning cocktail. He was not interested in answers. He just wanted to get out of the city, far away from this nightmare, from this injustice. His revenge was just beginning. He retrieved his belongings from the woods and got into Sarah's car, which was waiting for him, her face pale and anxious. They were followed by a police car, its headlights blinding in the dark. Sarah, pale and determined, told him that she had found dozens of cases where bail did not match the crime. All the detainees were deliberately kept behind bars for exactly 90 days. Why would the police do this? Ethan was no longer interested in answers. He just wanted to get out of the city, far away from this pain. Just in case, Ethan left his phone number with Sarah. He felt that this was not the end yet. His revenge was just beginning. At night, the police stormed into Sarah's house. The sound of breaking glass, the thud of boots. They injected her with drugs and tossed the syringe into the sink to frame her. The dazed girl, barely able to stand, her thoughts muddled, almost called the police. But then, through the fog, she came to her senses and dialed Ethan. Her voice was hoarse, filled with terror. He arrived at her house in his brand new pickup truck, which he had bought with the remaining money, and found Sarah in the bathroom, trembling and scared, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm fighting for custody of my daughter," Sarah whispered, her voice full of despair, as if she were speaking about a sentence. "If this comes out, I can forget about her. They knew how to push my buttons. I was involved in a criminal case before that they could use against me." The next morning, despite her condition, despite the tremors in her hands and the fog in her head, Sarah went to work. The judge had already been informed that she had broken at the sight of drugs. The girl was immediately forced to relinquish custody of her daughter. Sarah realized that she had lost both her job and her child. Her world collapsed, leaving behind only emptiness and burning pain. The emptiness in Sarah's chest was bottomless. She had lost everything she lived for, everything she fought for. But through that emptiness, a cold, steely determination began to grow. If the system could take her child away, she would fight that system to her last breath. She had nothing left to lose, and that made her dangerous. Ethan hoped to remain unnoticed, but Officer Stone was on his tail and ordered him to stop. The siren wailed, its piercing sound cutting through the air. A little further, another police car stopped, blocking the road. "I promise I won't be coming back now," Ethan said, his voice full of sarcasm. But there was a steel thread in it. "The chief gave you a lucky break, and you threw it away," Stone growled, his face twisted with rage. He tried to shoot Ethan, but only grazed his shoulder. Pain shot through Ethan, but he gritted his teeth. Despite the pain, Ethan knocked Stone out with a taser. The jolt crackled through the air, and Stone collapsed to the ground. Meanwhile, another police chief, Mr. Chen, an elderly but sturdy man with wise eyes, watched as a police car picked up his daughter. Ethan had known Chen for many years, back when he was just opening the hearth. Chen was a regular customer, and they had built a trusting relationship. Chen, a former field medic during the Korean War, had always been a man of honor, but a few years ago, his own son, a talented student, was falsely accused of drug possession. He too spent 90 days behind bars, his life shattered, and the arrest records vanished. Chen knew it was Thorne's doing, and he vowed that one day justice would prevail. He hid the pickup under a bridge and called Sarah. It turned out the girl had a friend in the police, and he advised her to get out of town as soon as possible, so she was already packing her things. She was also told to stay away from Ethan, but she ignored that advice and met with the fugitives in a small, nondescript restaurant on the outskirts of town. Mr. Chen, his hands steady and calm, was just extracting the bullet from Ethan. Ethan was lucky to have met such a person. "Thank you for your service, sir," Ethan said, feeling the pain recede and his strength return. Ethan realized they had decided to get rid of them quietly, otherwise they would have called in the SWAT team. "It's all about the investigation," Sarah thought, her eyes narrowing. She understood that they had witnessed something much bigger than mere corruption. They were a threat that needed to be eliminated. Sarah turned to a lawyer colleague, an old friend she trusted. He didn't say anything directly, but hinted that it would be wise to visit the judge who handled Daniel's case. Ethan did just that. The judge, an elderly man with a weary gaze, spoke in a quiet voice, but there was a deep sadness in it as he told them the whole truth. It all began with the police killing an innocent person. The lawsuit over this case nearly bankrupted the town, and the treasury was now constantly being replenished by the machinations of Chief Thorne, who was winning against the entire town. The accused, who could not post the exorbitant bail, were always kept behind bars for exactly 90 days. The cases were so trivial that they were not even entitled to a public defender. And according to the rules, data from the recorders could be deleted after this period. It was a carefully thought-out scheme to cover up the traces. The police did something to Daniel to throw him in jail, and the arrest record was stored on a hard drive in the courthouse, specifically under the courthouse, in a storage facility known as the Judicial Archives. To confirm his words, the judge showed them several short but chilling excerpts from cases that Sarah had previously found. A case where a student was framed with a couple of grams to keep him locked up for 90 days, or an elderly woman who lost her home due to a ridiculous charge of possessing a small amount of marijuana. That night, the police decided to destroy all the evidence. They set fire to the Judicial Archives. Flames licked the ceiling, smoke filled the entire space. A pile of hard drives was stored in the warehouse. It was impossible to retrieve them all. But Sarah, her mind racing, remembered the SD cards from the recorders. Over the past week, 24 cards had accumulated. On one of them was the recording with Daniel. This was their only chance. Without wasting a second, Sarah ran to the courthouse to find that recording. She knew time was short. The police, already waiting for her, grabbed her there. They tied her up and taped her mouth shut. Ethan was waiting for his partner at the main entrance and saw the police throw her into a car. He heard her muffled scream. They briefly stopped next to a police car. Without thinking, Ethan crashed into it. The impact was strong, metal crunched, glass shattered with a deafening sound. Ethan, through the pain, pulled the officer out of the car. He resisted, but Ethan, using his skills, quickly subdued and tied him up. They agreed to exchange Sarah for a flash drive at dawn in a designated place at an old abandoned factory where life once thrived, but now desolation reigned. An entire armed squad was waiting for the Marine, their shadows flickering in the pre-dawn gloom. But for some reason, Ethan did not show up. Miller, who was in the squad, his face tense, noticed his car on the bridge and smashed the window. But in the driver's seat sat a bound police officer, his eyes full of terror. At that moment, Ethan was breaking through the wall of the storage facility in the police station. The sound of crumbling concrete was deafening. He outsmarted Chief Thorne and shot him several times with a traumatic pistol he had taken from Davis. Thorne fell, writhing in pain, his scream tearing through the silence. Miller, seeing this, realized that Davis had been helping Ethan. "Listen to me, Jim, I shoot the bastard," Ethan shouted to Davis, his voice filled with rage. He handed her the flash drives and put on a bulletproof vest. "If Sarah gets hurt, I will burn all the money along with the precinct." Suddenly, Davis aimed the gun at Ethan. Her hand trembled, but her gaze was steady. "I won't let anyone die today," she said, her voice firm despite the internal struggle. Ethan stepped outside and threw the bag with the weapons on the ground. Davis handed all the cards to Stone, who, with a triumphant smile, crushed them underfoot. The crunch of plastic was heard in the ensuing silence. The villain had drugged Sarah and was about to execute Ethan, but suddenly Miller stepped in against it. "I'm going to arrest Ethan and get Sarah to the hospital as soon as possible," Miller said, his voice full of determination as he stepped forward. Our hero realized that his friend Sarah was mistaken. It was not Davis, but Miller who had betrayed him. But Miller was shot in the leg by the police chief Thorne, and so poorly that he began to lose a lot of blood. His scream of pain echoed across the parking lot. The police began to argue, their voices sounding sharp and nervous. "Should we call an ambulance at this moment?" Someone's voice rang out, filled with doubt. Ethan dragged Miller behind a car. Davis still hadn't shot at him. Her eyes darted between Ethan and Thorne. The Marine began throwing flashbangs at the police. The explosions were deafening. Bright flashes blinded. Smoke filled the entire parking lot, turning it into a battlefield. Miller, bleeding profusely, his face pale, told him to get the recording from the police car's recorder. It showed that the police chief had shot him. Ethan filled the parking lot with smoke and went to deal with the police in hand-to-hand combat. He broke and knocked out everyone in his path, his movements quick and precise. He took down Stone with particular brutality, working on him with his elbow. His anger was boundless. He felt every muscle in his body swell with strength. Ethan pulled out an overdose medication and threw it into Miller's car. He was about to jump into the right vehicle. Inside lay Sarah, a soldier. He brought her the necessary medicine. They spun away from the precinct, their tires squealing on the asphalt. At that moment, other police officers tried to block their way, but Davis, with unexpected determination, rammed the police chief's car. The impact was deafening. Metal crumpled, glass shattered. The chaos created by Davis allowed Ethan and Sarah to break free from the encirclement. Now they needed to deliver the recording to where it was supposed to go. The recorder was kept in the trunk. Ethan knew they wouldn't be able to escape the chase. The car had a flat tire, and every turn was difficult. Davis aimed her gun at the chief, her hand steady while he writhed in pain. Ethan carried Sarah to the hospital in his arms. Her body was light and fragile, but he felt her spirit's strength. After that, he grabbed a fire axe, its blade glinting in the light of the flashlights, and used it to retrieve the recorder from the trunk. All that was left was to wait for the normal police and hand over the recording to them. He knew there were honest officers in the city, especially in the Internal Investigations Department, who could be trusted with this explosive information. Ethan and Sarah, exhausted but unbroken, stood amidst the chaos, holding in their hands the only evidence capable of changing everything. The recorder in Ethan's hand seemed incredibly fragile, yet at the same time the most powerful weapon. They knew that handing over this recording was just the first step, and it would be the most dangerous. In their eyes, there was not only fatigue but also cold determination. This night had changed them forever, turning them into fugitives, but also into the only bearers of the truth. They understood that the enemy would not give up, and their struggle was just beginning. Suddenly, a sharp beam of headlight struck them in the bow, blinding them. Around the corner came the screech of tires. The city slept, unaware that beneath its cover, a new battle for justice was unfolding, and they were its first soldiers, already being hunted. The sharp beam of headlights struck them in the back, blinding them. Around the corner came the screech of tires, followed by the roar of a powerful engine. It was not a patrol car. It was a dark, faceless SUV that left no doubt about its intentions. Ethan and Sarah, exhausted but unbroken, stood amidst the chaos, holding in their hands the only evidence capable of changing everything. The recorder in Ethan's hands seemed incredibly fragile, yet at the same time the most powerful weapon. They knew that handing over this recording was just the first step, and it would be the most dangerous. In their eyes, there was not only fatigue but also cold determination. This night had changed them forever, turning them into fugitives, but also into the only bearers of the truth. They understood that the enemy would not give up, and their struggle was just beginning. The city slept, unaware that beneath its cover a new battle for justice was unfolding, and they were its first soldiers, already being hunted. "Run!" Ethan shouted, his voice hoarse from fatigue and tension. He grabbed Sarah's hand, her fingers cold and trembling, and they dashed away from the car, which had already begun to turn around, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The stolen vehicle they had arrived in was too damaged from the flat tire and Davis's crash to serve them any longer. They ran through dark, muddy alleys, past abandoned warehouses and industrial zones, where the air was thick with the stench of rotting garbage and dampness. Each step sent pain coursing through Ethan's body. His wounded shoulder burned as if a hot knife had been plunged into it, but he gritted his teeth, feeling the adrenaline pushing him forward. Sarah, despite her fatigue and shock, kept up, her breath coming in gasps, her lungs burning. They could hear the SUV slowly following them, its engine growling, tires crunching on gravel like a predator stalking its prey. Then came the footsteps, quick, heavy, professional. These were not ordinary police. They were hunters hired by Thorne to eliminate them. Ethan used his marine skills to cover their tracks, leading Sarah through mazes of dumpsters and dark passages where shadows seemed alive. He could smell the decaying garbage, dampness, and metal. The sounds of the chase grew louder and then quieter, making their hearts race wildly. "We need to contact Richardson," Sarah whispered, breathless, her voice filled with despair. "I sent him an encrypted message when we were at the hospital. He should have received it." They found temporary refuge in a half-collapsed hangar, where old trucks had once been stored. The air was cold, saturated with the smell of machine oil and mold. Ethan leaned against a rusty wall, trying to catch his breath, his body trembling from the strain. His wound throbbed, but he ignored the pain, focusing on Sarah's voice. Sarah pulled out her old, battered phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. "He replied," she whispered, her eyes widening with relief and fear at the same time. "He's waiting for us at the old dock by the lighthouse. Alone, he said it would be risky, but he's ready." They made their way to the dock under the cover of darkness, navigating the narrow, slippery planks that creaked underfoot like an old ship. The cold wind from the lake whipped against their faces, bringing the scent of fish and seaweed, seeping under their clothes. The lighthouse, its beam of light slowly sweeping across the dark water's surface, seemed the only landmark in this gloom, the only hope. Richardson was waiting for them, his figure barely discernible in the twilight, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked even more exhausted than before, his eyes filled with worry and his face etched with deep fatigue. "Sarah, Ethan," he said, his voice quiet but laced with steely resolve. I received your message. What do you have? He scanned them, lingering on Ethan's wound, on Sarah's pale face. Sarah handed him the voice recorder. The plastic casing seemed so insignificant, but its contents had the power to blow the world apart. It's all here, Richard. Thorne, his scheme with the 90 days, the murder of innocents, and Daniel. Richardson took the recorder, his fingers trembling slightly. He pressed play. Thorne's quiet yet distinct voice, his cynical smirks, his orders, everything filled the silence of the park, like voices from the abyss, penetrating the very depths of the soul. Richardson listened, his face growing paler, his eyes widening in horror and disbelief. He clenched his jaw, his gaze hardening. When the recording ended, he turned off the device, his hands shaking. My God, he whispered, his voice barely audible, filled with revulsion. This is everything you said. It's far worse than I could have imagined. This is not just corruption. This is an entire network. They control everything, the whole city. Perhaps, and not just the city, he raised his eyes to Ethan and Sarah. Do you understand what this means? It's war. Thorne will stop at nothing to hide this. He will do anything. He will destroy you and me and anyone who stands in his way. We know, Ethan replied, his voice as firm as stone, devoid of any shadow of doubt. We are ready. We want this to come to light, for everyone to know the truth, so that Daniel didn't die in vain. Richardson nodded, his gaze becoming resolute. I have to pass this on, but I can't guarantee your safety. You need to disappear. Right now, I will contact my mentor at the FBI, Agent Harrison. He is the only one I can trust in this matter. He is honest, but it will take time, and it will be very dangerous. He will act slowly so as not to spook them, to gather enough evidence. He left, his car fading into the pre-dawn mist, leaving them alone in the dawn silence. Ethan and Sarah knew that they were now targets number one. They left Silverwood at dawn, leaving behind only a shadow, dissolving into the foam. Their future uncertain, but their goal clear. Meanwhile, chaos erupted at the Silverwood police station. Richardson handed the recording to his superior, Captain Jenkins, not related to Sarah. The captain, a gray-haired, weary veteran, listened to the recording, his face growing darker, as if a shadow of death had descended upon him. He could not believe his ears. Phone calls, meetings, shouts. The station buzzed like a disturbed hive, filled with fear and panic. Rumors spread like wildfire. Thorne learned about the recording almost immediately. His fury was boundless. He paced his office like a beast in a cage, his fists clenched, and hatred burned in his eyes. He threw objects, his voice filled with uncontrollable rage. They must be found, he growled into the phone, his voice full of hatred. Alive or dead, especially Cole. And that girl Jenkins, they know too much. If they talk, everything will collapse. My empire, my life, everything. Thorne activated his sleeping connections. He called the mayor, who owed him favors, his voice filled with threats, reminders of past services, of skeletons in the closet. To the district attorney, who turned a blind eye to his machinations, and even to some federal agents who took their cut from his dirty money. He ordered them to use all their resources to find Ethan and Sarah, and most importantly, to discredit Richardson and his department. This is an attempt at rebellion, Thorne declared at an emergency meeting, his voice full of righteous anger, but his eyes betrayed fear. Cole is a dangerous criminal who escaped custody, killed an officer, and is now trying to tarnish our reputation. He is manipulating Attorney Jenkins. We must stop them. At any cost. The mayor, the prosecutor, and the agents, their faces pale, understood that their reputations and freedom were at stake. They nodded, promising full support, their voices filled with fear. Meanwhile, Davis was hiding in a small, dirty apartment on the outskirts of town, her windows covered so that no one could see her. She knew Thorne would be looking for her. She contacted Richardson, offering her help from the inside, providing information about Thorne's movements and his plans. She felt like a traitor, but understood that this was the only way to atone for her guilt, the only path to justice. Miller, severely injured, was in the hospital under guard. Thorne had ordered his men to watch him so he could not testify, so he would not become another witness against him. Ethan and Sarah were heading north, trying to stay away from major roads, choosing back roads in sparsely populated areas. They switched cars, stealing them from deserted parking lots, checking each time to see if they had left any traces, wiping the steering wheel and door handles. They slept in dirty, cheap motels under fictitious names, their nerves stretched to the limit. Every night they checked the locks, boarded up the windows, and listened intently to every rustle outside the door. Their conversations were short, fragmented, filled with exhaustion and hope. "How long can we keep this up?" Sarah asked, her voice steady, but there was a hint of despair in it. "Until we get what we want," Ethan replied, his eyes full of determination, his gaze firm. "Or until they find us." Despite the pain in his shoulder, Ethan was focused. He constantly scanned the surroundings, looking for signs of surveillance. He noticed every shadow, every car that lingered too long behind them, every unfamiliar silhouette in the rearview mirror. He felt Thorne breathing down their necks. The surveillance had become more professional. They no longer saw patrol cars. Now it was unremarkable sedans with tinted windows that appeared and disappeared like ghosts, or powerful SUVs that could navigate any terrain. Ethan felt they were being hunted by real predators, and the stakes rose with every mile they traveled. One night when they stopped in a small, sleepy town to buy supplies, Ethan sensed something was off. The air around them felt thick, charged. He noticed a black SUV that had been parked for too long, its headlights off, engine idling. "They found us," he whispered to Sarah, his voice tense, almost silent. They abandoned the car and ran into the woods that began just beyond the town, its dark, impenetrable walls seeming both a refuge and a trap. The sounds of the chase, barking dogs, shouts of people, the roar of engines, grew closer, tearing through the silence of the night. Ethan knew these were not ordinary police. These were Thorne's men, his personal thugs, possibly former special forces or mercenaries. They were ruthless, and their only goal was their death. Ethan and Sarah ran through the thick underbrush, branches whipping against their faces, leaving scratches, their legs sinking into the mud, and leaves crunching underfoot, betraying their presence. Using his marine skills, Ethan led Sarah, moving silently, trying to cover their tracks, avoiding traps that the enemy might have set. He heard Stone, his voice filled with rage, shouting orders to his men, his voice getting closer, cutting through the noise of the forest. He heard the whiz of bullets flying past and felt the ground shake from the footsteps of their pursuers. "They're here! Don't let them get away!" His voice rang out, slicing through the sounds of the woods. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. A bullet whizzed past Ethan's head, embedding itself in a tree with a dull thud. He fell, pulling Sarah down with him. They pressed themselves to the ground, their hearts pounding like mad drums. Ethan pulled 2 flashbang grenades from his backpack, their cold metal feeling reassuring in his palm. "When I throw them, run to the river," he whispered to Sarah, his voice tense but calm, as if giving an order. "There's an old boat. Try to escape. I'll hold them off." "No, I won't leave you," Sarah protested, her voice trembling. But there was unwavering determination in it. "We're in this together. We'll get through this together. We have no choice. This is our only chance," Ethan said, his eyes burning with resolve, leaving no room for doubt. "I'll catch up to you. Just run." He pulled the pins and threw the grenades. The deafening explosion shattered the silence of the forest, bright flashes blinding their pursuers, and their cries of pain echoed around. Seizing the moment, Ethan charged forward, engaging in hand-to-hand combat with the nearest thugs. He moved like a shadow, his strikes quick and precise. The crunch of bones, dull thuds against flesh, ringing in his ears, all blended into the cacophony of battle. He heard cries of pain as his fists and elbows found their targets, each blow infused with his grief for Daniel, his fury boundless. Sarah, trembling but resolute, ran toward the river. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she didn't stop. She heard the sounds of battle behind her, Ethan's shouts, and her heart tightened with fear. She reached the river, its waters black and cold, found an old, leaky boat, and with great effort pushed off from the shore. She paddled desperately, her arms aching, but she knew she had to escape so that Ethan wouldn't have sacrificed himself in vain. Ethan, having left a few defeated opponents behind, rushed after Sarah. He heard Stone, regaining consciousness, shouting, "They're leaving! To the river! Don't let them get away!" Ethan reached the shore. Sarah had already drifted a few meters away. Stone and his men emerged from the woods, their faces twisted with rage, their eyes burning with hatred. Stone raised his gun, aiming at Ethan. "You won't get away! Cole!" he shouted, his voice filled with menace. Ethan knew this was the end. He was wounded, exhausted, and had no chance. He looked at Sarah, who was paddling desperately, and pain flickered in his eyes. But at that moment, the sound of a gunshot rang out, and Stone fell, his body collapsing lifelessly to the ground. Ethan turned around. Davis stood on the shore, her gun smoking. She looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with determination, her face pale but resolute. "Run, Ethan!" she shouted, her voice full of despair and sacrifice. Ethan, unable to believe his eyes, plunged into the water. The cold water burned his wounds, but he swam with all his might, chasing the boat. Davis was left alone, face to face with the remaining Thorne's thugs. She knew this was her last fight, but she was ready to pay that price for justice. Ethan and Sarah, paddling desperately, looked back at the receding shore where a new battle was unfolding. They were on the run, but now they had a chance for victory.